What is up, duelists, and welcome to a little bit of a rogue video in Yu-Gi-Oh! I played Enneacraft at locals yesterday because it's a deck I've been really interested in, even though it is a pendulum deck, but it very much doesn't play like a pendulum deck. I was supposed to record my POV at locals with my GoPro, however my GoPro broke. I thought it was the batteries, so I got new batteries. Turns out it was the GoPro. But don't worry, I've already got a new one lined up, so we're gonna have the locals POVs back soon. But I still wanted to talk about my experience with Enneacraft, and I also noticed that, of course, a lot of people have a lot of trouble playing against Enneacraft because it has a lot of different effects. So I'm gonna try my best to explain how the deck functions, how the deck is trying to win, and also what some of the weaknesses of the deck are, because it does have quite a few weaknesses. I ended up going X1 at locals, which was fine. Funnily enough, my first matchup of the day was an Enneacraft mirror match, which I was able to win. I lost to Mitsurugi in the second round, which is a terrible matchup for the deck, and I'll talk about why in a second. Beat Hashtira Fiendsmith in round 3 and then a Branded in round 4. But let's get through the cards first to try and understand how this deck works. Now, the first thing you need to know for Enneacraft, and I'll just put all the cards down first, and then I'll go into the explanation. So we've got 3 Whales, 3 Arcatale, 3 Isa Leon, and 3 Pixia. Those are your big pendulums, and all of the big pendulums have the same pendulum effect, but a slightly different monster effect. Now, every time a monster is flipped face up, that's going to be the same for the big monsters as well as the small monsters. Each of your scales gets a counter. But in the case of the big ones, the second effect of the pendulum scale or the pendulum effect is at the end of the battle phase, you can pop a monster with less than 3000 attack. Now that is the least relevant part of all of the Enneacrafts, because the most important thing is what they do on the field. And of course, Enneacrafts have the ability to summon basically infinite amount of times in face down defense position. Like you can reveal any of them in your hand to special summon a monster from your hand in face down defense position. And that is an effect that not only the big ones, but also the small ones have. So we've got 3 Alazonia, 3 Orgia, 3 Tromaria, and 3 Okneria, which is the maximum amount of Enneacrafts you can play. These guys have a much better effect in the scale. Besides collecting counters, which is what they also do, you can pay 900 life points to reveal 3 Enneacrafts from your deck and add a random one from them to your hand, which is also the reason why we're playing each of them at 3 at the moment, even though some of the big ones especially are not that great. The small ones are amazing and you're always going to play 3 even with the new support, and getting another small one with the next wave of support is going to be great for the consistency of the deck. The big ones, they don't really get you started. They're more like end board pieces. But the small ones, since they all have that ability to pay 900 and search one, are really, really good. And you want to start with as many of these in your hand as possible. Now, the point where it gets interesting or becomes difficult to play and play against this deck is with the effects on the field. Now, since they are pendulum flips and they summon themselves in face down defense position, they all have an effect that basically activates as a quick effect when your opponent tries to do a certain thing. And that's going to be different for each of them. And that's what's going to make it so interesting to play against this deck, because basically you're given some amount of information from all the searches, so you can kind of guess which ones they have face down, and then you can play around that. So for example, the Alazonia, when it's face down, when your opponent activates a card or effect that would add a card from the deck to the hand, you can flip it face up and add an Enneacraft from your deck to your hand. And then it has a flip effect, which triggers on a new chain afterwards. It's mandatory, so it's going to be chain link 1, to banish a random card from your opponent's hand until the end phase face up. So this one triggers or activates when your opponent tries to search. This one triggers when your opponent activates an effect in the hand, and it also searches an Enneacraft card. All the small ones will search an Enneacraft if their condition is met. So this one, activate an effect in hand, you search an Enneacraft, and then on a new chain, mandatory flip effect, destroy a monster your opponent controls. Blue, Tromaria, activates when your opponent activates a card or effect that summons or special summons a monster. You can flip it up, add an Enneacraft card, and then on a new chain, mandatory flip effect, negate the effects of an effect monster your opponent controls. That does not target, but the fact that this one is mandatory makes it a whole lot worse, because, for example, when your opponent activates Mitsurugi Ritual to summon Murakumo and you chain this to flip it up and search, on a new chain, this one is always going to be chain link 1 no matter what turn it is, and then Murakumo will go on a higher chain link and still destroy your board, which is one of the reasons why this deck is so bad into Mitsurugi. This one triggers or activates itself when your opponent activates an effect in the graveyard or banishment. You flip it up, search an Enneacraft card, and then on a new chain mandatory flip, shuffle up to 3 cards from the opponent's grave or banishment into the deck. This has great synergy with Alazonia, which banishes a card from your opponent's hand until the end phase, but if you return it into the deck with the Okneria, they won't get it back, basically, right? So these, honestly, these are the bread and butter of the deck because they're your searchers and they're also often your part of your end board. You want a bunch of these on your end board as well because they will search you follow up while disrupting the opponent, right? Like your opponent tries to search, well, I'm also going to search and I'm also going to banish a card from your hand. You activate something in hand, I'm going to search and I'm going to pop a monster. You try to summon something, I search a monster and I negate a card. So like really nice. And then I can ruin graveyard follow up with these. So these are honestly, these are the really high quality cards of the deck. But the big ones are also kind of necessary to win the game, and they all have very individual purposes. Now, the whale is probably the most famous one, and the whale is also, I would say, the best one, even though it does have some drawbacks. Now, similar to the small guys, they all have a condition to be flipped, and they also have a flip effect after. This one can basically, during your turn, when your opponent activates a card or effect on the field, quick effect, flip it up, negate, and destroy that card, which is really powerful. And its flip effect is change all of your opponent's monsters to face down defense position, and they cannot change their battle position for the rest of the game, essentially. The only downside of this card, of course, is that it's only during your turn, the negate, right? So this is one of your best ways to play into a board going second, is to summon the whale first, and then when your opponent tries to negate something or tries to do anything, you can negate it and then also flip the rest of their board face down, which is really nice. The only downside of this card is since you can't use it on the opponent's turn, getting the flip effect to book your opponent's entire board is not that easy, but there are ways to do that and I'll show you them in a second. Architale is probably the most frustrating card if you are a fan of the Enneacraft deck, because this card is actually, I think this card is terrible. But at the moment, you kind of need to play it, and you probably will have to play it moving forward still, because this card covers one specific problem, which is when your opponent tries to destroy your face-down Enneacrafts. Because this thing can flip itself face up when the opponent activates an effect that would destroy a card on the field. And then you flip it up, and then your stuff can't be destroyed for the rest of the turn. The problem with this card is that it can be chain blocked. Like all of their conditions, by the way, all of their conditions can be chain blocked in some way, shape, or form. But this one in particular is the most frustrating one, because if your opponent summons Murakumo and you have 5 of them face down, the one that would prevent the Murakumo is this one. But if they simply go chainlink 1 Murakumo, chainlink 2 Kusanagi, or anything else in the graveyard, you cannot chain this and your entire board is going to get destroyed. Which is the reason why this deck at the moment just cannot beat Mitsurugi if your opponent is aware of that interaction, which they should be. So yeah, the idea behind this card is clear: protect the board from mass removal, but the execution is really lackluster. It doesn't actually do what it's supposed to do because it is so easy to outplay. It basically just protects you from like chainlink 1 Darkhold or Raigeki or Fallen and the Virtuous or something like that. Like against simple interactions, it's fine, but against the really strong ones, if they're properly chain blocked, it does nothing, unfortunately. Then we have Isa Leon, which I think is really cool going second. This card says when the opponent activates a card or effect in response to your card or effect, you can flip it up and then bounce up to 3 cards, which is really powerful. Once again, similar to the whale, when you're playing into the board and you start with this, put it face down on your field, and then you activate something else that your opponent wants to respond to, you can just flip this up and bounce 3 cards, which is really neat when you're playing into a board. And these two, Whale and Leon, can be really strong, especially when you combine them with each other. When you have access to both of these going second, you put them both onto the field, your opponent does something, you negate it. If they try to interact with the whale, you also chain this, or the other way around. So these two, in my opinion, the coolest ones, by far the easiest ones to use as well. These two can feel really clunky. Pixia is targeting protection. Basically, when the opponent targets, you flip it up and then you can negate that effect. As simple as that. All of these also have a flip effect. Don't worry, stay with me. This is necessary if you're trying to play against this deck and trying to understand it, because it is a control deck and you need to be aware of all the triggers and how exactly they work. This one, after it's flipped face up, every time a monster goes through your opponent's graveyard, they take 900 damage, because burn is the win con of this deck. After this one is flipped face up, if they add a card from the deck to the hand, they take 900 damage. And this one, after it's flipped face up, the opponent can no longer target stuff on the field or in the graveyard. That includes their own field and graveyard. That's all the Enneacrafts for now. We're gonna get very good support in the next set, which is gonna patch some of the problems, but for now, these are the Enneacrafts that you're working with. So the most important thing when you're playing against Enneacraft is to understand there's layers to it, because they have a condition to flip themselves up, which is something that you will trigger when you're playing against this deck, right? Like when you're trying to add, when you're trying to summon, when you activate something in hand, they will flip themselves up, do something, and then have another separate flip effect that activates in a new chain. That's very key to understand when you're trying to play against this deck, is knowing when they can trigger what and what will happen once that, occurs. So essentially, the idea of this deck is you're trying to set up as many of these on the first turn as possible, and you're trying to use some spell cards to do that as well. So we've got Enneacraft Rebirth. Essentially, the best comparison I have for this card is Magical Mallet, which is return cards and then draw the same number of cards, but you can also return Enneacrafts from your field, which means you can also return your scales, and you can return monsters that you happen to have on the field, draw the same amount of cards. So one very basic thing that you can do is you just activate one of them in your scale, search another one in your scale, put that one in the scale, search Rebirth, and then Rebirth shuffles those two back and draws you a card. That way you get a very simple +1 in the process, and you also get this card into the graveyard, which is really important. You always want to have this card in your grave, because this card says when the opponent normal or special summons, you can banish it from the grave, and then you can do one of two things. You can either special an Enneacraft from your hand in face down defense position, which is the less relevant effect, or you can flip an Enneacraft face up. So this is how you get the whale flipped on your opponent's turn. It's going to be set, your opponent summons, at some point you banish this from your grave, flip up the whale is going to book your opponent's entire board, which is a really strong interruption, right? And they can't flip those cards back up ever. And then we've got 3 Enneacraft Release. This is just a consistency card. It places an Enneacraft from your deck in the Pendulum Zone. It also creates follow-up, because you can banish it from the grave to add an Enneacraft from your face-up extra deck to your hand. So if they ever destroy one of your Enneacrafts on a follow-up turn, you can add it back to your hand, which is neat. And now the win condition of the deck, 3 Enneapolis. The field spell of Enneacrafts doesn't do anything on activation. However, during the end phase, you remove all of the counters, right? Remember, the scales collect counters every time a monster is flipped, and this is where the counters come into play. During the end phase, you can remove the counters you have and inflict 900 damage for your opponent for each counter. So after a total of 9 counters, you will win the game, because 9 times 900 is 8,100 damage. And you would actually be surprised, once you have control over the board, how easy it is for Enneacraft to assemble those counters and actually finish the game off. It does something else that's really neat for the deck, which is once per turn, you can target Enneacraft cards you control and return them to your hand. This does 2 things. First, it lets you search with the scales and then bounce them back to your hand, so you can actually use them as monsters. And the other thing is you can return Enneacrafts on your in the monster zone that you've already flipped face up, and then you want to reset them basically. You can bounce them back to your hand and then summon them back. One last thing that this card does is when an Enneacraft is flipped, you can move it from your monster zone into your pendulum zone, which can be neat because you can make room for a new Enneacraft, or during the opponent's turn when they play into your board, you don't always have scales already set up. So you flip one of them up, then you put them in the pendulum zone, and then it starts collecting counters towards your win condition, which is neat. And that is it for the Enneacraft cards. This is the maximum amount of Enneacrafts you can play at the moment. This is 33 cards, so basically it's a full engine deck. For non-engine, we're playing 3 copies of Sol and Luna, which is a very interesting card. It's basically a double position change. You pick one of your monsters and one of your opponent's monsters, and if they're face up, they get flipped face down. If they're face down, they get flipped face up. So basically, you're always going to try to book an opponent's monster, and for your side of the field, you can pick either, like you can use it on something that you've already used, put it back face down to use it again, or you can flip a whale face up at any point if you want to, or you can flip one of the other big guys up to prevent like your opponent from doing other things, or so that they start taking damage whenever they search, and so on and so forth. So this card is really neat in this deck, and it's really fun to play with, and it's really cool that there is finally a deck for this card. Then I'm playing 3 copies of the Fallen and the Virtues because this deck is really grindy. Also, shoutouts to peeps who joined me on stream building this deck together. This is mostly leaning on his theory on the deck. He told me he was playing Dimensional Fissure instead to out Droll and Lockbird, basically, and he told me like he thinks this card is also good, so I decided to play this one in the main deck instead. This card is neat because it's very strong in grind games. This deck is very grindy, but it also, when you have something like the Whale or Leon set up when you're going second, you can use this card really well to stop or to take apart your opponent's board without the opponent have, like, if your opponent chains, you're going to punish them, basically, is the idea, right? Like you target something really important, and then if they chain it, then you know, Whale or Leon is going to negate it, or bounce 3. So this card was neat. And then there's one called by because Droll and Lockbird murders this deck. Droll and Lockbird is crazy. You can't really play around it. Now, in order to better conceptualize what this deck is trying to do, let's look at like an example of how a first turn could look. Now, of course, because we're playing 33 engine cards, it's basically not likely that you're ever going to do a 1-card combo, but basically you can assume that you're going to have multiple Enneacrafts in your hand. But an example first turn could look something like you're going to activate one of the scales, which is always your best start. You're going to pay 900 to reveal 3 of one of the other scales that you don't have in your hand. Let's say blue. Going to use blue, pay 900, and that's usually the point where if you don't have it in your hand, you're going to search Enneacraft Rebirth, because at this point you're going to need to make room to play the other scales to get your searches, and you want this in your graveyard, so you're going to use this to shuffle these 2 into your deck and draw the same amount of cards. You can also shuffle any Enneacrafts that you currently have in your hand but don't need into the deck and draw extra cards with those. So gonna draw at least 2 for a free +1 overall and setting this up in the graveyard, but most importantly clearing up the scales. At this point, you're gonna try to find or already have in your opening hand a copy of the scales that you haven't used yet, or a copy of Enneacraft Release. Let's say it's Release. We're gonna use Release to place yellow. Gonna use yellow to grab red because I just remember them by the colors, it's easiest. And then place red. And at this point, if you don't have it in your hand, once again, you're gonna reveal 3 copies of the field spell, so you're guaranteed at the field spell. You're gonna activate the field spell, you're gonna use the field spell to bounce these 2 back into your hand, and then alongside this, you're gonna have, I think, 3 other cards, because that was a 2-card combo of 2 of the scales, basically. 3 others in your hand, so you're gonna have 7 cards in your hand, field spell set up, these 2 in the graveyard, and then you basically just start special summoning all of the Enneacrafts you have in your hand, the best disruption ones. So in this example, we would be summoning these 2 face down. I'm just going to keep them face up for better visibility. If you don't have the Whale, you're always trying to prioritize searching the Whale because it is the strongest disruption with Rebirth in the graveyard. So usually you're going to have the Whale, and then you're going to try to get as many others as you can. It can be the targeting protection, it can be Leon, which is not the best when you're going first because your opponent is not that likely to chain to your stuff. But Arcatail to prevent destruction, or just more of the small ones. I like the small ones, honestly, because the small ones create follow-up, which is really neat. But, you know, an end board could look something like this, and then you're still going to have 2 cards in hand. And if you have extra Enneacrafts in your hand, you can choose to scale them so you can start collecting counters immediately. Or in an ideal case, you've drawn like a non-engine with your Rebirth draws. So like you'd have like a Fallen Anti-Virtuous or a Sol and Luna behind this board. So this is what you're trying to get to on the first turn, basically. So what we have in this example is, if the opponent tries to add, we can flip Alazonia, search an Enneacraft for follow-up, banish a card from the opponent's hand until the end phase. You then have the option to move the Alazonia into the Pendulum Zone, where it starts collecting counters for the rest of your stuff. If an effect in hand is activated, you can flip this up, search an Enneacraft card for follow-up, pop a monster. This card also, if you have extra copies of this card in your hand going first and you can already play the game, you can set this so that you can chain it if your opponent activates Ash or Droll or whatever to get a free search, which is really neat. Once this triggers, you get to pop a card or pop a monster and search a follow-up. This thing is something you're going to try to trigger with Rebirth in the grave at some point to book your opponent's entire board. If they do something in the graveyard, you got Ogneria to search, and then if they ever try to target something, you can do this. Now, this board is really weak to mass removal, so essentially Murakumo is a huge problem for this deck. Dracotail, if the Dracotail player plays it well and never triggers your Arcatail, because they always put Urgula and Pan on a lower chain link and always chain block it, then this card is really annoying. This card, however, can be pretty good against Dracotail, so the Dracotail matchup, I think, is doable, especially when you're going first. but it has a very rough time against anything with mass removal. So anything with Mitsurugi is going to be a tough matchup at the moment. Evenly matched is a huge problem. Other than that, if decks don't have that, it actually can get quite grindy from there. So extra deck, really quickly, it's completely irrelevant. We're playing the Fallen and the Virtuous. These matter. The rest of this has never been used. A Linkuriboh just in case, an Anima just in case, an SP Little Knight to, double Typhon, because this is the one thing that could reasonably actually come up on like turn 3 if your opponent plays into your board, and then, and then we have a couple of Exceeds. We have Zeus. The big ones are all level 9, so we're playing the 2 Generators and the Phantom Fortress. I'm playing a rank 1 to make Zeus with the level 1s. I'm playing a Downer to make a bigger Zeus, and I'm playing a Dragon's Gate because why not? I've never summoned any of this. I think I mean, of course you need these. I can see myself needing these. This is very situational, but it could come up, but rarely matters. So yeah, the extra deck is fairly relevant for this deck. Side deck was kind of thrown together. I wasn't really sure what to do, so I'm playing 3 sphere modes just as a generic board breaker. As you've noticed, there are no hand traps in my deck. We're gonna try to basically play into a board and then just like book all their stuff with the whale and beat it that way. Sphere mode can help. There's a couple of matchups where it really helps, like Yummy. Caesar is also good against this deck, so having it as an out for decks that can go into Fiendsmith combos, I think is helpful. Then we've got 3 Retaliating Seas, mostly for Draco Tail. This is going to be a lot worse post-Burst Protocol because they got the new Fallen of Albaz, and then they're going to start with Cartesia more often and not with a spell card. But right now, it seems pretty solid. Didn't play against Draco Tail, so didn't really need it at locals, but, Draco Tail is a popular matchup, and it's not the easiest matchup, but unlike Mitsurugi, you could actually win it, so I wanted to be prepared for it. Mitsurugi, I think, is straight up like an auto loss most of the time, so... And then we got some fun cards. We got Vanity's Fiend. That's actually one way you could beat Mitsurugi when you're going first. It's just way too easy to summon this guy in this deck. It's cringe, but all of them summon themselves from the hand, and you don't need your normal summon at all. So if you get drolled or anything like that, this is your answer. This is how you still win the game. And it also beats evenly, which is another problem of the deck. It can't get Murakumo, so it's a cringe card, but it just so happens to basically answer all of the problems that this deck has, so it's here. Same thing with this. It mainly for droll, but also for any matchup where it barely, like, if you don't care about it at all, so if your opponent cares about it just a little bit, then decided not to main deck it because I wanted to go with the Fallen and the Virtuous instead. Post side, when I know I'm going first, I felt like I needed an answer to droll and Lockbird though. And then there's 3 Evenies, which was the MVP when I played the Enneacraft mirror match in round 1. Other than that, I haven't activated it. But yeah, this card kills this deck. There's no answer. It doesn't target, it doesn't destroy, so nothing you have will prevent it. You can't negate it with the whale because the whale only works on your own turn. So Evenly quite literally has no answer in this deck as of now. And I also don't think that changes with the new support. So yeah, Evenly is really good against this deck. Thankfully, it's not as popular at the moment, even though some people are playing it versus Draco Tail. But yeah, this side deck is kind of like whatever. I didn't really put too much thought into it because this locals, I just wanted to experience the deck, basically. I was trying to wrap my head around this deck because it is such a weird concept for a Yu-Gi-Oh deck, which I really enjoy, honestly. It was quite the experience because it doesn't play like any other deck I've ever played. So I encourage you to try it out. It's honestly quite fun if you're not running into specifically Murakumo. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed the little bit of a deep dive. This might have been a little longer than other deck profiles, but I feel like this deck kind of deserves that. So I'm looking forward to the new support. Let me know what you think about this deck, and thank you for watching.